It is. It's a slog right now. Workforce, supply chain. There are a lot of challenges that need to be fixed to get to that stage.
If China were to take military action against Taiwan, what are the options for the United States?
Well, the issue would probably be what types of action the Chinese could conduct. For example, an amphibious invasion of an island like Taiwan or another, Philippines, Japan. They could conduct a blockade or quarantine, which is an act of war, particularly a blockade, or they could conduct sort of what we call gray zone or irregular operations. So depending on what type of operation the Chinese
What's most
conducted,
likely?
I actually think something closer to a blockade or a
Okay, so
quarantine is more likely.
if there's a blockade, what does the U.S. do?
Well, that's a really interesting question. You know what the U.S. did during the Cold War, and it's a different situation when the Soviets prevented the U.S. from getting to Berlin. Was they broke that what was essentially a blockade by flying in aircraft. So the U.S. could use commercial ships to run the blockade or quarantine that China provided to get food, fuel, and other types of, and even ammunition, although that would obviously make the Chinese unhappy, to Taiwan. The question is, would the Chinese sink those vessels, and then do we get an escalating scenario where we go up to war? I've played in a few war games in a blockade and quarantine, and sometimes you escalate up to conventional war. So there are huge risks in that, and a lot of it would depend on how those countries operate.
Let's talk to callers. We'll start with Debbie in Maine on the Republican line. Hi, Debbie.
Hello, good morning.
Morning.
I love your guests. I love you, Seth Jones. First of all, Bath Iron Works just put a ship out, I think a couple days ago. Susan Collins was there when they launched it. My opinion on the Iran war, I say we go in and take them out. The Iranian, well, how do you call it, the IRGC, whatever. The Iranian people need our help. And I think we ought to pay the Kurds, get them out of Iraq, and get them on Cargo and shut that island down. That's my opinion.
And Debbie, when you say go in, are you in favor of ground troops in Iran?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
You want to pay other people to do it?
They got bridges, they got electrical, all that production, we got to stop Putin from sending ships to Iran. So
Seth Jones.
Yeah, Debbie, so first of all, on Bath, I have been there many times. Bath Iron Works builds the U.S. World-class Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. But, that's one good example. We talked shipbuilding. Well, one good example, the cost of living for those welders, electricians, pipe fitters at a place like Bath Iron Works is grown increasingly expensive. So I think the U.S. has got to look at options for increasing education at some of the, like vocational schools, but also raising the pay so that people at areas like Bath can afford to live in and around areas like coastal Maine. But I think it's, the stuff that's done at Bath is important. On Iran, I actually think at some point that's probably where we'll get to, that the U.S. president is going to have to take a risk in conducting escalated military campaign against the Iranians. I think it probably is too risky to put ground forces. I'm not sure it'll actually be helpful. So I think what it'll likely involve is some type of combination of air and naval vessels to open up the strait, to increase the flow of commerce through the Strait of Hormuz. There aren't without risks. You could get U.S. aircraft or Allied aircraft shut down, knocked out of the skies, and the U.S. has already lost over 42 aircraft since the war began. And you could get naval ships, including ones built out of Bath, Maine, that get hit, including those Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. So there are risks involved. I think what's actually going to be very important at the end of the day is to build a coalition to do it, because I think as longer this war persists, I think there will be support from a range of Gulf countries and other U.S. allies to join a mission like this. We saw this in the 1990-91 Gulf War against Iraq. And so I think that's sort of the direction we're likely to go down.
Can the Kurds do this?
Well, that gets into another issue, which is the overthrow of the regime. That's where the the Kurds can't open up the Strait of Hormuz. I don't think they can't play a meaningful role there. But I think the question when it comes to the Kurds and other opposition groups in the world is can the U.S. and other organizations, this would be CIA, Special Operations Forces, aid opposition groups in Iran? Yes. Will that lead to an overthrow of the government? Probably unlikely. The social engineering from the outside has been difficult, problematic, even with boots on the ground. So I wouldn't bank on a high probability.
We got this from a guy in Oklahoma. He says Iran has no water, no food. Inflation is approaching 400%. No money to pay the RIGC and police. No commerce. Their military is completely eliminated, et cetera, et cetera. What is keeping Iran from complete collapse?
There are a couple of things. One is the Iranian population does have an ability to take sort of extraordinary risks, and it's been for decades suffering, not quite at these levels, but it's been ostracized. I think one of the things that we are seeing, to be clear, is that both the Russians and the Chinese have given a lifeline to the Iranian economy. They're continuing to provide goods and services. The Chinese are buying Iranian oil. So, they do have allies. They're providing help to the industrial base. So it's a good question, but I think what we've seen is the Iranian population has been able to stomach extensive suffering. And the challenge right now is there has been a bit of a rally around the flag effect in Iran, where the population, because it's being targeted so heavily over the course of 2026 by the Israelis and the U.S., the population of Iran has in some ways embraced the regime from the external threat. So I think those are a few of the factors that are preventing the regime from collapsing right now.
Terrell, Owings Mills, Maryland. Democrat. Go ahead.
That's right, Democrat. Okay. Hey, look, I remember back when 250 of our Marines were killed over there in Beirut, Lebanon, and Ronald Reagan didn't do anything about that. What I want to ask about the JCPOA and how important that document is, because I heard Alex, I think it was Artankin on the show the other day, and he said that Artanka, right? You were there, okay? Artanka was there, and he said that there were some people in the Trump administration that wanted to stay in the JCPOA. So, sir, can you tell me? I know that Rex Tillerson, I heard what he said. He told Donald Trump to stay in the Iran deal. I want to know if that was true, and also if there were any other members of Donald Trump's cabinet that wanted to stay in the JCPOA. Can you answer that for me, sir?
I mean, there was a pretty robust debate leading up to the decision in the first Trump administration to walk away from the nuclear deal, the JCPOA, with Iran. Unfortunately, the National Security Council minutes right now of the meetings probably won't be declassified for another decade and a half or so. So we don't know all of the positions in the Situation Room because they're still classified. But it does look like Rex Tillerson, for example, had some questions about pulling away from the JCPOA, the Secretary of State at the time. But I would just say the reality at this point is that once the first Trump administration walked away from that JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, it became very difficult after that, and still is today, to get a deal done. The Biden administration couldn't get it done. The Trump administration is having a difficult time getting it done. And part of the reason right now is that the Iranian position is that the U.S. changes presidential administrations every 4 or 8 years. So any deal, as they have seen, any deal that gets stuck, a new administration could walk away from it. So why should we trust any deal that the U.S. makes if another administration can turn and walk away? That's the problem, I think, we have right now with the Iranians agreeing to a deal. And that's probably partly why the U.S. position was last year in 2025 during Operation Midnight Hammer, without a deal, is to strike targets as part of Operation Midnight Hammer and to set back our analysis at CSIS was the Iranian program was probably set back a year, maybe two. But that's not a great long-term solution either. So I think the challenge we've got is it's been hard for any Republican or Democratic administration to get a deal with Iran because of those time horizon issues.
So absent a deal, if it's going to be so difficult to actually get a deal that will stick, is the only solution here military action like Midnight Hammer? So every so often we go in and we destroy it, set it back a year or two, then they start rebuilding, we go in militarily and destroy it?
I mean, that is an option. If there is no deal and no Republican or Democratic administration can get a nuclear deal with inspectors on the ground, IAEA inspectors on the ground, to verify that the Iranians are abiding by a deal, if that can't happen, and there is intelligence from the U.S. and others that the Iranians are continuing a nuclear program at Pickaxe Mountain, at Isfahan, at Natanz, or at other sites, then I think you are looking at likely what you will call mow the grass strategy for the Iranians. Every so often you will see strikes. I will say the challenge with that is the Iranians are getting smarter about where they're putting their material. Some of the locations in Pickaxe Mountain, for example, if you look at the satellite imagery and then look at the tunnel complexes, and we can't see them all underground, is they're deep. So some of those large bombs that could be dropped from a U.S. Bomber, the Israelis don't have, may not be able to penetrate that deep. So the Iranians may take some action underground that may make it even difficult for military operations.
Going back to the JCPOA, for those 2 years that it was in effect, the people that were in favor say it was working. Those that are against it say it was not working. Which is it? Do you know, was it working for those 2 years that the U.S. and Iran were under that agreement?
Well, it does appear, based on what the inspectors were able to assess, that it did have a positive impact in slowing the Iranian program down. Big picture, though, it is worth pointing out that the Iranians have had either plans or, in actuality, covert nuclear program since the revolutionary regime began, really actually since the early 1980s. So nuclear weapons are the strongest deterrent. I think the Ukrainians probably wish they hadn't given them up after the collapse of the Soviet Union.
And the North Koreans.
And the North Koreans have them. Nobody's attacked North Korea. So I do suspect, regardless of any of this, there will be a desire in some capacity to have a covert program.
On the independent line, Jettersville, Virginia. Angela, you're on with Seth Jones of CSIS.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. Has there been any official release on the investigation that tragically claimed the lives of the 160 or so children? And as we continue to learn more about that tragedy, how do we ensure that we hold those responsible and accountable without allowing that one single devastating event to dictate our border strategy, specifically for the Strait of Hormuz?
So by the way, the children, I'm assuming the
girls' school in Iran.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I haven't seen an update recently on where that investigation stands. I do think it's important. I mean, having served in Afghanistan, I was a civilian in the U.S. military, in U.S. Special Operations. There have been a number of cases in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other locations where U.S. bombs hit civilian targets, wedding or other locations. U.S. does not do this to conduct strikes against civilian populations, including girls' schools, as a matter of policy. So I think it is important to investigate and hold accountable those involved. Was it a problem of intelligence? Was it a problem of execution? So I do think it's important to continue to investigate that. I have not seen an update recently on where that investigation sits.
Let's talk to Terry next. He's calling from Tennessee on the line for Republicans. Terry, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, go right ahead. You're on the air.
Yeah, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about the Iran war. You can talk about the Russia-Ukraine war.
Oh, okay. Well, the way I I see it, he's already started it over there. He needs to tell all the innocent people to get out of the way and go over there and just wipe them out and be done with it. That's the way I see it.
So the concept of, President Trump should just finish the job. What does that mean strategically? What does that mean on the ground?
Well, I think that the answer to that question hinges on what one means by finish the job. There really, I think at this point, are probably two big objectives that the U.S. that sort of sit before U.S. leaders. One is opening up the Strait of Hormuz so that the U.S. can, so that there can be a free flow of trade, and that, for Americans, the gas prices, among other things, start to come down. I mean, they're high across the U.S. right now. So opening up the strait, that's one objective. And two is that there is a continuing effort to make sure that Iran does not get a nuclear weapon. And so there are a range of different ways you could get there. I actually think the second option on Iran and a nuclear weapon is a little bit easier to solve in the short term, because Iran's capabilities actually have been degraded for the next couple of years, our assessment anyway, because of the strikes against some of those nuclear facilities. And that brings us back to opening up the Strait of Hormuz. And there I think you're talking about, if there is no deal, we do not have one right now, can't get a deal on opening it up the straits. The Omanis and the Iranians are discussing options for bringing in tankers on the Iranian side and coming out on the Omani side, potentially sharing some taxation of those commercial vessels. People don't want to talk about taxes, but sharing some taxes. And if that doesn't succeed and stick, then I think you're talking about escalation of military options.
But on the nuclear program, the stated goal is that Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. Never is a long time. So how do you measure the success of that? You can certainly delay it, but as you've said, they will always most likely be looking for a nuclear weapon, regardless.
So I think one has to be careful about promising ever. I think what you really want is to incrementally weaken their program and make it difficult for them to build nuclear weapons. I mean, the problem at the end of the day, if you get an Iran that has nuclear weapons capability, is that it does risk additional proliferation. Saudis appear interested in a commercial nuclear program. We've seen the Japanese and Korean leaders in the Pacific talking about nuclear weapons. So the worry is, if Iran gets nuclear weapons, the Turks have talked about potential nuclear program privately. That's the concern if you get to a point where Iran actually has nuclear weapons, is we see growing proliferation. But I think you've got to take this in sort of bite-sized increments, delaying Iran's capabilities over a period of 2, 3, 4 years. It's unclear whether the Iranian regime survives 5 years, 10 years. So there may be other variables in the future that come into play.
And for our caller, Angela, I want to just point out to you, the BBC has this article from last month in July. It says, quote, "What was their crime? The BBC visits Iran school where strike killed 120 children." You might be interested in reading about that. Here's Margaret calling from California, Democrat. Hi, Margaret.
Hi, thank you. My comment is, part of President Trump's legacy will be that he allowed Russia to conquer Ukraine and make it part of Russia. This war could have been finished long ago if President Trump had given Ukraine the help he has given to Israel. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think sort of setting aside politics, for example, the reality is that the full-scale war starts in February of 2022, although actually the Russians seized Crimea back in 2013 and then went into the Donbass later that year. So this war has been going on for well over a decade. I think at various parts, my view during the Biden administration, there were efforts to provide some weapon systems, but there were limitations to how they were how the Ukrainians were allowed to use them. The ATACMS that were provided to the Ukrainians, Ukraine couldn't use them to strike targets in Russia. And there were a number of weapon systems that weren't provided. Now, during the Trump administration, there have been some limits also to what the Ukrainians, what the U.S. has been willing to provide the Ukrainians. So I talked to President Zelensky about his request for Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles, which the U.S., the Trump administration considered and then decided not to provide. There had been some thought about giving additional Patriot systems, air defense systems, or allowing the Ukrainians to build Patriots. And it looks like that has not, the U.S. is still unclear what it's going to do on that, on allowing the Ukrainians to build Patriot weapon systems. I think the reality, though, is that there are two things right now that I think would be helpful that increase the probability of an end to the war. One is primary and secondary sanctions against the Russians for continuing this war. It's something that now the recently deceased Senator Lindsey Graham supported, including on his most recent trip just before he died to Ukraine. So it's sanctioning the Russians. And then the second is continuing, I would say escalating the type of weapon systems that the Ukrainians need to defend their territory. Everything from air defense systems to components for long-range strike. That is what I think would be helpful right now to putting Vladimir Putin in a position where he recognizes he cannot win this war. And that is where I think we need to get.
One more call for you from Larry, a Republican in Pennsylvania. Good morning, Larry.
Yes, I was just calling because I wanted you can shut the door, Nick. I was just calling because I feel that the United States, I mean, that boat place where they're coming through to try to where the oil was at, and that I think the United States should just take over that place and get charged them for it and split the money with China. That's what I think they should do.
You talking about Carg Island, Larry?
Yes, I think they should take over that place, take all the oil, the ships, and charge them for coming through there, and split the money with Russia, and take care of all these older people that with Social Security and stuff and all the Medicare. We would have no problems.
Well, thanks, Larry, for your comment. I mean, I think the challenge, because we've looked at at what a military operation, whether it's to send troops into Carg Island or also into some of the islands in around the elbow of the Strait of Hormuz, like Greater Toomb or Lesser Toomb. The challenge, Larry, I think that any military, including the U.S. military, would have is Carg Island is actually relatively close to the Iranian mainland. And what we've already seen is the Iranians continue to have a number of capabilities, anti-ship cruise missiles, drones, including the Shahed 136s. So you'd be putting U.S. boots on the ground on an island right off the coast of Iran, within range of cruise ballistic missiles and drones. And I think that's the challenge one would face, whether it was in cooperation with another country or not. That is the challenge of a military operation so close to Iranian territory, is the Iranians are not going to allow that to happen without a fight. And I think for any U.S. military leader, whether you're deploying the Marine Expeditionary Unit, 82nd Airborne, or other Army forces, is are you going to be okay if and when U.S. soldiers are killed and are wounded on Carg Island trying to take it with Iranian missiles and drones coming through? And I think that's the political risk that any president has to weigh in trying to seize an island like Carg.
Seth, what's the one thing the administration, in your opinion, should be doing that it's not doing right now on Iran?
I think the biggest issue that probably should have happened at the beginning, and I think if you look at some of the U.S. campaigns, 1990, 91 Gulf War, even the early weeks and months of the war in Afghanistan after the U.S. was hit on 9/11, is that the U.S. put a coalition together of countries with an objective that then worked in tandem to achieve political and military objective. That has not been done, in my view, well enough. And there are enough countries in the Gulf right now, some U.S. allies in Europe, that could provide resources to help open up the strait with force if necessary. So for me, the biggest issue has got to be building a coalition that can work towards an agreement. And if that collapses, then tell the Iranians, then you're going to face a coalition if we do not get a deal. I don't think there's a way that this challenge ends without some kind of a coalition. And it should have happened, I think, before Epic Fury started.
That's Seth Jones. He's president of the Defense and Security Department at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mimi.
And we will go to the end of the program with another round of open forum. You can start calling in now. The numbers are on your screen. Republicans are on 202-748-8001. Democrats, 202-748-8000. And Independents, 202-748-8002. We'll be right back.
In a divided media world, one place brings Americans together. According to a new Maggin research report, nearly 90 million Americans turn to C-SPAN, and they're almost perfectly balanced. 28% conservative, 27% liberal or progressive, 41% moderate. Republicans watching Democrats, Democrats watching Republicans, moderates watching all sides. Because C-SPAN viewers want the facts, straight from the source. No commentary, no agenda, just democracy, unfiltered, every day on the C-SPAN networks.
Best ideas and best practices can be found anywhere.
Well, we have to listen so we can govern better.
Democracy depends on heavy doses of civility.
You can fight and still be friendly.
Bridging the divide in American politics.
You know, you may not agree with a Democrat on everything, but you can find areas where you do agree.
He's a pretty likable guy as well.
Chris Coons and I are actually friends. at this point, somehow that our understanding is that anytime you use a personalized pricing, not only you're going to make a price variable across the customers, also that indeed the price always go high. I don't believe that's the case. And in fact, the fact that our prices are variable, they are already there already. And so you don't need the AI to do all that. And the firms do actually change the pricing in so many different ways. And but in terms of whether prices always go up, I think that probably is not the case. That certainly is not the case if the firm doing the right thing. And most importantly, I think recently I wrote an article criticizing what firms are doing. And they basically gave people the impression that any time you do personalized pricing, you always change the price and going up. Somehow make the price variable and also price it up.
Well, but isn't the goal of surveillance pricing always to maximize profit? I mean, and this gets back to, aren't the firms going to do that unless we, just like, let me give you a different example also from the law, just like firms would absolutely run right over your property rights if we didn't have laws that define them. If we didn't have laws that say, no, actually, that belongs to you and I can't just take it from you. I might want it, but I can't just come over there and take it from you. I can't take that coat off your back unless I get your consent to it. Why? Because we have property laws that say, that's yours, and you can enforce it against me. In this case, the consumers have no protections. They've got no protections. The firm has all of the information. The corporation's got all of the power. I have no power to set the price. The only thing I can do is hope and beg that maybe at 2 a.m. in the morning when my child is running 102-degree fever and I desperately need Tylenol, that maybe if Walmart Plus is charging me $30 for it, gee, if I can drive to an open CVS, maybe I'll get lucky. I mean, I'm just at their mercy, right? That just seems fundamentally wrong to me. And I think it seems fundamentally wrong to most Americans, which is why we're here today. They think that, my gosh, I'm getting screwed in this. And they are getting screwed, right? I mean, they're getting screwed day in and day out. That's why we need to do something about this. Mr. Hebner, I want to ask you here, as my time runs out, but I'm the chairman, so I can just go on indefinitely. I'll come back to you, Senator Blumenthal. Yeah, we'll. You know what? For those of you who have been in hearings with Senator Blumenthal and me, the two of us together we can go on quite a long time, and I'm happy to do that today. Let me just ask you, and I'll turn it back over to Senator Blumenthal, about a JetBlue lawsuit. You know, there's this JetBlue incident. There's now a class of putative JetBlue customers who are suing the company. Are you following this? And what can you tell us about their claims and you know, why this is important, something we should be aware of?
Yeah, I think it's an important class action lawsuit against JetBlue that alleges a lot of what we've been talking about here today, that personal information, a wide breadth of personal information collected through JetBlue's website, collected through Google Pixel, was collected from would-be travelers, shared with third parties, and used to engage in discriminatory pricing like that is on this poster behind you. And they allege various violations of existing law. They allege that this actually is civil and criminal trespass against consumers. They allege that this is a violation of federal wire fraud statutes, criminal and civil. Now, some of that is based on the fact that the allegation is this was unauthorized. This was an unauthorized trespass, an unauthorized collection and disclosure and misuse of that information. And I think that calls into question, whether a consent-based solution is actually appropriate here. Because if that consent is buried in a privacy policy, those claims might not be viable. They also allege violations of general consumer protection law, state consumer protection law. And I think there's a strong argument there, but for the fact that federal law preempts a lot of the enforcement of consumer protection laws, and I'm interested to see how that argument plays out in this specific context, but in other contexts, false advertising laws at the state level, the Passenger Bill of Rights in New York have been deemed unconstitutional or preempted by the regulation of rates, routes, and services by federal transportation law. So it's an interesting case, and I'm eager to see how it proceeds.
That is exactly the topic I wanted to explore, state consumer protection laws, because you can't have the Federal Trade Commission on the one hand saying there's nothing to enforce here, and then have a judge say a state enforcement of consumer protection laws against surveillance pricing, personalized pricing is somehow preempted. In fact, states have very broad authority under their state consumer protection laws. Every state has one, and they are extremely adaptable. I sued the tobacco companies under our state consumer protection laws. Everybody had a very convoluted theory of how we needed new laws to sue the tobacco companies when they lied to smokers about cancer and other diseases, about nicotine addiction. And I said, they're breaking our consumer protection laws. This is deceptive and misleading practices. And I think the same theory could be applied here. I wonder whether, and the reason I raise it is that it takes a long time around here to get a law passed. And there are a lot of reasons why laws don't get passed. There are more reasons not to pass a law than to get one done. And the elephant in the room today, the elephant in this room, is the one that Dr. Owens mentioned. The industries. The industries are tooth and nail against any of these restrictions. They will seek to water them down and obstruct them and stop them from passing, and it's much easier for them to do at the federal level than at the state level. And I've been in our state legislature, and I was also state attorney general for 20 years, and we used consumer protection laws to go after almost everything that harmed consumers. Because in order to get away with it, they have to be deceptive and misleading. So I would ask, maybe I should be in with you and ask others, can't we use existing law more expansively and aggressively to go after some of these practices?
From paperwork to privacy, filings to fees, starting a business can be complicated. At North
Welcome to Ceasefire, where we look to bridge the divide in American politics. I'm Dasha Burns, Politico Playbook co-author. The U.S. is at a critical juncture in two global conflicts. The Iran war, now going into its 6 months, and efforts to end the nearly 4.5-year-long war between Russia and Ukraine. So joining me now to discuss both foreign policy hotspots are two foreign policy pros from both sides of the aisle. Evelyn Farkas, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia during the Obama administration. She was also former senior advisor to the top military commander for NATO's operations in Europe. And Michael Allen, he worked for the House Intelligence Committee as well as the National Security Council during the George W. Bush administration. Thank you both so much for joining me and bringing your expertise.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
There is a lot to talk about, and I do want to start with the war in Iran. Some escalations this week. The White House retaliating after after Iran attacked U.S. forces in the region. I want to hear from you both. Where do we stand at this point?
We are stuck. Essentially, President Trump doesn't want this war to continue. And I would argue that the Iranians probably don't either, but neither side is willing to budge. Negotiations seem to be stuck. The use of force has not caused the Strait of Hormuz to be opened or closed effectively, frankly. And our generals, apparently, our armed forces are telling the president, according to media reports, that we are diminishing our supplies. So it's not working, and we're expending munitions that we should not expend. So we're stuck. Essentially, I think the best option is to try to wait out the Iranians, because they can't keep going like this forever either. So economically, Iran will need more revenue, and their people will eventually get restless.
Michael, what changes this trajectory? What gets this unstuck?
I think we need some strategic patience here. I think the president and others are looking for an out button that will deliver victory quickly, and it's just not going to happen.
I was going to say, does that out button exist? Given where
it doesn't. I mean, I think you have to keep the blockade going, and we've done it off and on over the last couple of months after hostilities were done. We need to continue to degrade the parts of the military that Iran can use to police the straits from their side of things. And we might also have to resume some of these programs that we have. One was called Project Freedom, to help guide certain commercial vessels through the Straits of Hormuz. I mean, I wish we weren't in this position either, but we're in it. We need to win. I think we need to negate the leverage that the Iranians have over us. And the way to do that is to forcibly reopen the straits with the United States military. It's not easy, it's not without risk, but we are where we are, and we have to figure out a way to break this.
Evelyn, given what Michael is saying, do you think that a peace deal is still possible, or is that just foolhardy to even think about right now, given where we are?
I mean, I think a peace deal is possible because, as I said, neither side really wants to keep on fighting forever. The question is, under what circumstances? What are the terms? The Iranians want a bunch of money, and they want to keep on doing what they've been doing. They want to continue being as hardline as ever when it comes to ruling their country. They want to use their proxy forces to attack Israel and us and our other allies and partners. And they want to, of course, have their nuclear weapons program. Those things are unacceptable to us. So we might be willing to give them some of their frozen assets back, even though President Trump uses different terminology to talk about how the Iranians might get access to some money. But that's the part of the deal that we might be able to negotiate on. The Iranians then have to come to the table and be willing to freeze their nuclear weapons program, stop the proxy wars. It's a lot. So at this point, no one has enough leverage, as Michael said, to make the one side blink.
Well, and on top of that, we not only have escalation, but we have expansion. The New York Times writes more countries are pulled into the conflict with spate of attacks. The U.S. and Saudi Arabia said they carried out airstrikes on Iran-backed militias in Iraq. Iran targeted sites used by American military in Jordan, and a U.S.-owned ship that was hit in an Egyptian port. What is the impact, Michael, of more countries getting involved here?
Well, I think this is Iran's way of horizontally expanding the conflict and saying to the United States, here's what we can do to you and your allies around the region. But if you try and hit our energy infrastructure, we're going to go on a higher order with you and try and knock out the energy infrastructure. So I think they're trying to demonstrate they're not afraid of us. They're trying to demonstrate that the 12-day campaign of a couple of weeks ago didn't work that well. But let me just mention on Evelyn's point about whether there's a peace. I don't really think there's a peace deal that's going to be in the offing whatsoever. At most, it would be something simple along the lines of the MOU. It would just need to be neater and cleaner than the previous one was. I think over time, we're going to devolve into some sort of understated type of arrangements, maybe a modus vivendi with Iran, whereby some of the ships come up towards them, others are safely coming elsewhere through the Straits of Hormuz. Maybe the Qataris unfreeze some of the money that is supposedly theirs, and maybe we tit-for-tat fight every once in a while. But I don't see a big peace agreement coming anytime soon between us and the Iranians, which is another reason I think that they're hitting all over the place to demonstrate their reach.
Yeah, I mean, do you guys think that ultimately it's going to have to get worse before it gets better?
I don't know, because as Michael said, strategic patience, if we can be patient, and if President Trump cannot signal so much to the Iranians that we want peace and kind of let them suffer a bit internally, because they also do have some struggle inside of Iran. You know, there are those diplomats who want an end to this, whether you call it peace or some kind of deal. They want a deal so that they can get back to business as usual. It's the hardliners that we don't want to have the upper hand, and they do have the upper hand as long as we seem like we're not having patience and we want to use force.
Prime Minister Netanyahu met with Trump this week. Here's how he described that interaction to Fox News.
How'd that meeting go?
It was great. It was one of the best meetings that we've had, and I always hate to disappoint our would-be critics who are trying to find, cracks in our alliance. And what they find, like today, is a wall of granite, because the president is so clear. I mean, we have a common commitment. We don't want to see this fanatic regime in Tehran have nuclear weapons to threaten every American, and to threaten the peace of the world, and to threaten the existence of Israel. So we have a common goal, and it's going to be achieved either through diplomatic means or other means. But we're both committed to that, and that's the main headline.
Right, a pretty chipper Netanyahu there. He's indicating that he and the president are exactly on the same page. Do you buy that, Michael?
Not exactly. I think he had to project that it was a great meeting because he's up for re-election in October, and the quickest way he may lose anyway, but the quickest way for him to lose is for the president to say more and more increasingly nasty things about him. So I think he needed to be able to say this, but it might have gone well anyway, because for the very same reasons, I don't think he was making sharp asks of the president saying, let us resume the bombing with you, or I wish you would bomb this, that, and the other. I think he was tiptoeing around these issues, trying to reestablish a rapport with the president, because if he didn't, then Israel and Netanyahu are in big, big trouble, because we're the best asset they have. We're their best friend, arguably their only friend in this difficult period.
Evelyn, how much do you think the objectives of the U.S. and Israel differ right now?
Well, yeah, so I agree with everything Michael said, and I can even go further to say, sure, Prime Minister Netanyahu was correct to say that we share an objective, which is to stop Iran's nuclear weapons program. But the immediate U.S. objective is different from Israel's immediate objective. President Trump wants to open the Strait of Hormuz yesterday. He wants to get trade flowing. He wants to get oil prices down, right? The Israeli prime minister, he's interested in continuing the war because he wants to make sure that he can't have any more Hezbollah strikes coming out of Lebanon, that there is really no nuclear weapons program. Those things are much more urgent and important to him. Plus, being up for re-election, there's a lot at stake for him personally, and continuing the war means that he stays out of legal trouble. He's facing an indictment on corruption. He's also facing, of course, political headwinds internally. So for him to be at war is more desirable. For President Trump, it's a loser.
I want to play you guys kind of a striking clip that came out this week. The late Senator Lindsey Graham was the subject of an upcoming documentary, and in one of his final interviews taped in June, Graham gave his assessment of the Iran war. Take a listen to this portion of it obtained by CNN.
He's letting this thing slip away. We had him on the ropes, and his indecision's coming back to hurt us. I got to go talk to him, you know. Open up the straits, keep the pressure on, unleash Israel to hurt them, and maybe you'll get a better deal. But the big deal, Saudi Israel, you went with me. That's the big prize, and that can't happen until Israel and Saudi believe Iran can't be an upheaval force, that they've been put in a box. And here's the good news. MBS and Bibi have two things in common. They owe Trump a lot, like Trump, but they're afraid of Trump. And Trump is the first president who doesn't hold back when it comes to Israel. I mean, I think he's going a bit too far, but he will dress Bibi down in a way that no other Republican president has ever done. That gives him some credibility in the Arab world.
So Senator Graham was one of the biggest proponents of the war and had the president's ear. Michael, what do you make of that assessment?
Well, I thought it was just a frank look at where he thought the president was a few weeks ago, which is where many of us thought he was, which is that maybe we shouldn't have been in this conflict in the first place, but if you were on your way to doing it, you should have prosecuted all the targets that CENTCOM came up with. And if you were serious about this, you should have kept Project Freedom going or gone all the way with an escort mission to get commercial vessels, especially oil tankers, through the Straits of Hormuz. But the president paused the campaign, and then he stopped Project Freedom, which has left us in this sort of netherworld of, well, are we just sort of committed, but not really? Are we just going to bomb on occasion? I don't think occasional bombing gets us what we want from a hardcore ideological regime that's bent on the preservation of their own regime. So I think we've got to get serious about what we're doing, and I think that was a frank assessment of where he thought we were.
Yeah, I mean, Graham also talked there, Evelyn, about the president's relationships with other Middle East leaders. How do you think Trump is perceived in the region right now?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I actually traveled with Senator Graham and with that crew to Munich because they were following him also to the Munich Security Conference last February.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they've been doing this for years. Look, I think that Lindsey Graham understood very clearly what President Trump's strengths and disadvantages were, perhaps sometimes diplomatically. And I think he's correct that the Gulf leaders, they respect President Trump. In a sense, maybe they do fear him because of his, unpredictability. Mm-hmm. This latest decision by President Trump to say, well, the Saudi energy deal, the nuclear energy deal, might be in jeopardy if they don't play nice with Israel, if they don't essentially make a deal and become part of the Abraham Accords, so essentially recognize Israel state to state. That's also interesting because President Trump is using his leverage in a way that is kind of risky because the Saudis could turn towards China and say, we're going to do this with China. But again, I would say, hearkening back to Senator Graham, I don't think that the Saudis will want to move away from President Trump like that.
There's been a lot of discussion as well about what this war means for our weapons stockpiles. The Wall Street Journal writes, Washington's very sensitive secret, how many U.S. missiles are left. The government doesn't want to reveal how many missiles it has left, as it doesn't want to telegraph to Iran or Russia or China or North Korea, for that matter, that the U.S. might have vulnerabilities. To be clear, these are numbers the government never wants to release, even during peacetime. But there are some folks sounding the alarm on this now. Michael, how big of a concern is this?
I think it's a pretty big concern. I mean, it depends on what weapon systems we're talking about. I mean, there's a dozen different ones, but by all accounts, the ones that we need the most, I think, are interceptors, especially Patriot interceptors. Ukraine needs them. They need more of them. We need more in the Gulf because our allies are getting struck frequently by Iranian ballistic missiles. To say nothing of drones, which is another sort of technology system that we've got to work further on as well. But it's a real issue. It's very serious. It's something that the Congress and successive Pentagon administrations underfunded for many, many years, and that's put us in this predicament that we're in today. I know the Trump administration and the Congress are absolutely committed to solving this, but it's going to take us a while to ramp back up the capability to produce them as fast and as quickly as we would like.
Let's talk about another priority for the late Senator Lindsey Graham, which was Ukraine. The Senate moved forward the Russia sanctions bill that he championed. Here is Schumer and Thune this week discussing that legislation.
At a time when Ukraine is turning the tide in the war against Putin, we must show the Ukrainians that our Congress and our country are fully behind them, and show Putin that his war is a losing battle, because the people of the United States and this Senate stand behind the Ukrainians. With this bill, we're going to show the Russians we mean business.
This is a bill that aims to shut off a key source of strength for Russia's war effort. It targets China's source of cheap energy, and it ensures the president can continue putting maximum economic pressure on Iran as well.
Evelyn, what impact might these sanctions actually have here?
Look, if they are applied the way that Senator Graham intended them to be applied, they can have a real impact, because if you are a country buying substantial amounts of oil and gas from Russia, you will either have to pay up in sanctions or you will have to find other sources. So that's significant. It will definitely discourage countries from going to Russia for their oil and gas. And obviously it's a signal. It's a signal to Ukraine, it's a signal to Russia. And just to get back to what Michael said about the depleted munitions, because I want to have bipartisan agreement here, because I think there is bipartisan agreement across this town, you know, Congress, the Pentagon, et cetera, that we do need to do something about our industrial base. But I think the short-term answer, though, is to prioritize Ukraine over the Middle East, frankly, because if we can take Russia out as an actor, as a weaken Russia, you know, make sure that Russia is defeated on the battlefield, it will make everything easier in the Middle East, for example, because Russia will not be able to help Iran with intelligence or with drone capabilities, because they now have better drones than the Iranians. So, you know, I think there are some answers out there.
Well, you made an excellent point that I wanted to touch on with you guys, because as we know, none of this is happening in a vacuum, right? What's happening in the Middle East has an impact. I mean, Zelensky has been concerned that the attention of the president and the administration is very much on the Middle East right now, but we are at such a critical point with Russia and Ukraine. How are these conflicts playing with and against each other?
Well, I think Evelyn's right. There are some trade-offs when we talk about munitions and weapons and the rest. A lot of it is the mind share of the most senior leaders of the country. How many things can they literally do at once? It's tough in the White House when you have all these crises to manage. But I do think that we're at a unique moment in this Russia-Ukraine war. Things have turned in Ukraine's direction. I don't even think they were really losing per se previously, but now they darn sure aren't losing, and arguably they're winning. The Russians are having trouble filling out their forces. So many are killed. They're losing in the innovation game. Their economy is worsening. Bad things are happening to the Russians. I don't think they're going to lose. I don't think they're going to collapse, but we might be closer than ever especially if the president will apply some more sanctions to Russia at possibly getting Putin in a position where he might agree to the ceasefire, which is what the president wants more than anything. He wants to be the peacemaker. So let's reorient our policy towards pressuring Russia and not Ukraine, see if we can get a ceasefire. Maybe we can't. Maybe things just sort of settle into a frozen conflict. But big things are happening over there, and we need to watch very carefully and adjust our policy accordingly.
Well, and Ukrainian President Zelensky was also in town this week, and he spoke with Fox News about how Ukraine works to update their technologies to stay ahead of Russia. Watch.
I think this is really a big problem for him. We understood that this war is changing each 3-6 months. We have to change technologies. And that's why we have a real modern MilTech platform. And we have a lot of companies. We change drones. Today, these drones can work on the battlefield, but after 3-6 months, it can't. So it cannot. So that's why you need be strong each moment and change technologies and be quicker, because we have to be quicker than Putin, because Putin has more people than we.
I mean, Evelyn, what do you think of that assessment from Zelensky?
Yeah, it's absolutely right. That's what the Ukrainians have done. They just innovate so fast. They learn on the battlefield. There's like a connectivity between the manufacturers and the people out in the battlefield that's amazing. And then this idea, you know, they have fewer people. They do. So they've used robotics to go in and like take, you know, injured troops off the battlefield so they don't have to sacrifice any people coming in to rescue them. The Ukrainians have been incredibly innovative, and we are learning from them. And our Gulf allies, as Michael and others have mentioned, you know, they're basically paying for Ukrainian to defend themselves. So we're all in a global war.
To take and push back mighty Russia out of their territory.
Well, it's also remarkable to think about the relationship between President Zelensky and President Trump and how that has taken a complete 180 turn since this time a year ago, right? And look, we know President Trump, he likes a winner, and right now Ukraine is winning, and you've seen his tone change. The warmth that he displays towards Ukraine and Zelensky now is not something that we've seen, I think, up until very recently, Evelyn.
Although, when he was recently asked about intelligence from, I believe it was from Russia to Iran, and then there was also something about China, he said, well, I've talked to those leaders, I've talked to Xi and I talked to Putin, and they assured me that they're not helping Iran. But his own intelligence community is telling him otherwise. So he still is somehow afraid or hesitant, I don't know what the right word is, to publicly say that Putin is actually causing American lives to be in jeopardy. So even though he is definitely much, you know, he has a much warmer relationship with President Zelensky, he clearly appreciates the winner, he's still somehow hesitant to directly contradict or put a kind of a point a finger at Putin.
Yeah, Michael, Republicans have traditionally been so much more hawkish on Russia and on China, and it's something that this president just like refuses to do. Is this art of the deal stuff? Is this just a completely different ideology than traditional Republican understanding of these relationships?
It's definitely different than your historical Republican. I mean, I think the president puts a lot into personal diplomacy. In my estimation, too much. I don't think nations give up on their vital national interests because they like the leader of another country. But I know he likes to be on good relations, especially with who he considers the peers of the United States, and that's Putin and Xi Jinping. But at the end of the day, I think that structurally we're opposed to both of these nations. You asked a minute ago about trade-offs in the conflict. They're all together. North Korea is backing Ukraine. China's sending things to Russia. I'm sorry. Yeah. North Korea is backing Russia with troops. There's so many things that China is shipping to the Russians to keep their war machine afloat, and everyone's helping Iran as much as they can. So they're all allied against us, and we need to work with our allies, by the way, to try and stave these countries off. And as Evelyn said earlier, I mean, we might be in a position now where we can kind of close out Russia if Ukraine can finish the job. And you know, Iran seems like they're 10 feet tall right now, but they have severe economic trouble, and we don't actually know what's going to happen there. So let's stay the course like Lindsey Graham would have wanted us to do. Let's be aggressive. Let's spend more on our defense and intelligence budgets right about now, and I think good results could occur.
And Evelyn, to get to that outcome that both you and Michael are talking about, of finally putting Russia in its place, what does Ukraine need right now? Potentially these sanctions will come through. What else does the U.S. need to do to close this thing out?
Well, I think obviously the sanctions, as you said, they need to get the help with the Patriot missile systems. It sounds like Raytheon or RTX and Lockheed Martin are now in negotiations with the Ukrainians about intellectual property and making a deal to do that. They need to accelerate that, so our government needs to support that. Ongoing intelligence support, and then every kind of munition. They still need, ammunition, regular ammunition. Most of all, of course, they need air support, but anything they can get from us, and accelerated, and not telling them they can't hit certain targets, which I don't believe we have been doing anymore because the Ukrainians control the use of their own weaponry. So I think if we can continue to just stay the course and put more pressure on Russia, Russia's really brittle right now. Michael said it, and the economic component, we haven't talked about that very much. We haven't talked about what's going on internally in Russia, how critical the right wing has been of Putin, how there are voices that you haven't heard, saying this, we're not winning. The business community, the oligarchs are also saying this. They're not as powerful as the security folks. So it's the security folks that ultimately have to go to Putin and say, boss, this isn't working.
All right, that is all the time we have. Michael Allen, former Senior Director for the National Security Council, and Evelyn Farkas, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Former White House Chief Medical Advisor Anthony Fauci was on the Hill this week to give testimony on the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Fauci gave his opening statement before invoking his Fifth Amendment right. Take a listen.
Given Senator Paul's obvious obsession with calling for my prosecution, his repeated slanderous comments about me, and recently his publicly releasing my unredacted personal diary aimed at embarrassing and intimidating me, the only conclusion I can reach is that the sole reason he is calling me before this committee is to get me to say something, anything, that could vindicate his repeated public pledges that I end up, in his words, quote, behind bars, unquote. Under the advice of my attorneys, I will invoke my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution to refrain from answering your questions.
Clearly, Dr. Fauci's attorneys are saying that he has a Fifth Amendment right. We've also subpoenaed him to be able to compel his testimony to be able to be here. I happen to be in the committee. We're also dealing with Lois Lerner. Lois Lerner came and testified, gave an opening statement, and then took the Fifth Amendment. The committee then held her in contempt for that, saying you can't do both. You can't both testify and say I'm not going to answer questions.
Senator Langford's comparison brings us to this week's C-SPAN Flashback, where we dig deep into the video archives to show you a moment in political history similar to what's happening today. Back in 2013, then IRS official Lois Lerner was brought before the House Oversight Committee to testify about allegations the tax agency targeted conservative groups seeking tax-exempt status. Here's a portion from her opening remarks.
On May 14th, the Treasury Inspector General released a report finding that the exempt organization's field office in Cincinnati, Ohio, used inappropriate criteria to identify for further review applications from organizations that plan to engage in political activity, which may mean that they did not qualify for tax exemption. On that same day, the Department of Justice launched an investigation into the matters described in the Inspector General's report. In addition, members of this committee have accused me of providing false information when I responded to questions about the IRS processing of applications for tax exemption. I have not done anything wrong. After very careful consideration, I've decided to follow my counsel's advice and not testify or answer any of the questions today. Because I'm asserting my right not to testify, I know that some people will assume that I've done something wrong. I have not. One of the basic functions of the Fifth Amendment is to protect innocent individuals, and that is the protection I'm invoking today.
2 months later, Congress, led by House Republicans, voted to hold Lois Lerner in contempt of Congress for refusing to answer lawmakers' questions. Fast forward to today, and Anthony Fauci is facing the very same fate. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul is calling for a contempt of Congress vote against Fauci. To discuss the Fauci hearing and other top political news stories of the week, I'm joined by two political pros from both sides of the aisle. Democratic strategist Joel Payne, former campaign advisor for the Hillary Clinton presidential campaign, and Deputy Press Secretary for then Democratic Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, and Republican strategist Lonnie Chen. He was chief policy advisor to the 2012 Mitt Romney presidential campaign. Thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
All right, I do want to start with the Fauci hearing this week because Congressman Darrell Issa weighed in on that Lois Lerner comparison, writing on X, "I'm not surprised Anthony Fauci would repeat Lois Lerner's disgraceful performance. This is no regard for the law, and I'm calling for swift accountability." A Senate committee will vote next week on whether to hold Fauci in contempt. But I want to know from you guys, from the political strategy of this and how voters might be seeing this, how much do you think people want to relive and relitigate the pandemic? And how much do you think this is something that voters are looking for?
We're a polarized country, and I think people will see this testimony, will see Dr. Fauci's response through the lens of how they view politics. And I think it does fall fairly cleanly along partisan lines if you look at the way in which various people have responded to Dr. Fauci's testimony. Republicans have predictably responded in one way, for the most part, Democrats a different way. But look, two things can be true about Dr. Fauci's testimony, or lack thereof, I suppose. On the one hand, it can be true that people in power at the time, including Dr. Fauci, tried to make the best decisions they could based on what they were saying. But it can also be true that some of those decisions were wrong. And in retrospect, it's easy for us to look back on them and say, maybe that wasn't right, maybe this wasn't right. But fundamentally, how the American people see this, I do think is largely driven through a political lens and will be filtered through their personal politics.
Well, do you think the Republican base needed this and wanted this?
I don't know that they needed it. I think certainly a lot of Republicans have felt that Dr. Fauci was the archetype, if you will, of a lot of the bad decisions that were made during the pandemic, that a lot of what we saw in terms of learning loss and people having restrictions was because of Fauci's pronouncements. So I think there is some sense that there has to be accountability for that. Politically, I don't know if it really benefits the Republicans. I don't know that it motivates base Republicans anymore. I don't think it's a turnout move necessarily for the midterm elections. But I do think it satisfies a need and a desire, I think, that some Republican voters want to see accountability for those decisions that were made.
What do you think, Joel, this does or doesn't do for Democrats in this conversation?
Well, I'll just kind of pick up on where Lonnie left off, which is, look, Donald Trump and Republicans made it very clear that retribution was a key part of their political offering this time around. When Republicans swept back into power, when they got back in front of voters in 2024, they said that, Donald Trump can be your retribution. And I actually think that this is them living out part of that pledge to voters. I think the bad news for them is that that's not what voters want. Voters want them to focus on the economy. Voters want them to focus on making their lives better. Voters want them to secure a safe and secure nation. They don't want these types of political retribution, dog and pony shows. And I think that's what we saw. I think, and again, I agree with a lot of Lonnie's analysis. I think there is, certainly parts of Fauci's reaction that can be picked through and that things can be learned from. And we can improve upon what our public health officials do if we ever find ourselves in that situation again, which is why I think it's such a missed opportunity. And I imagine so many American people are like, well, what happened? Why did Dr. Fauci get some of the analysis right, but some of it wrong? And how do we do better? And instead of getting that, they get Bernie Moreno using lurid language at a hearing like that. They get Rand Paul threatening to jail somebody without really any pretense. They get Republicans just emptying the clip of everything that they can do in terms of, scourging, Anthony Fauci's name. The last thing I'll say is, remember what Anthony Fauci first became known for in the public zeitgeist. It was fighting HIV and AIDS in the 80s. And I wonder what it does to other people who may want to potentially serve themselves up for public service. Does it make it less likely for somebody to want to go into that work or to be a public health official? I think there's a lot of
Yeah,
implications
watching
from
those
this.
hearings does not make one want to jump up and
Serve yourself up.
get
Probably the
out
right
there.
way to
Yeah.
think about it, eh?
Well, let's talk about Blanche. His confirmation has stalled in the Senate, in the Judiciary Committee. Voting has been postponed as Republicans, John Cornyn and Tom Tillis, have withheld their votes. Now, the president is threatening to withdraw the confirmation until after Cornyn and Tillis are out of office, which will happen. What does this all say, though, about the relationship between the president and Republicans in Congress?
Well, it hasn't been a complicated relationship to date. I mean, it's been fairly straightforward, which is that Republicans in Congress have executed on whatever the president wanted.
Yeah, right.
Now, what I think that the change dynamic is that you see, indeed, elections have consequences, and when you participate in an election to oust a sitting United States senator from your own party, there are implications to that. And I think, look, Tom Tillis. And to the degree that John Cornyn and Tom Tillis are making the decisions they're making, I think they have real substantive concerns. I don't think this is entirely about politics. But I also think it's the case that what you're seeing is two senators who are exercising the power that they have to get an outcome they believe is the right outcome, which is a written assurance regarding certain promises that the administration has made relating to this anti-weaponization fund or the lack thereof. So I think that what they want is perfectly reasonable. The challenge is, I don't know that the road necessarily gets easier for the president going forward. He is trading certainty, which is if he were to put this in writing, he would get his nominee confirmed, for the uncertainty of the election outcome and potentially others saying in January, let's say this gets delayed till then, after the seating of the new Congress, that outcome is going to be different, that Blanche would be confirmed in that situation differently than now. So I just think that it's the challenge for the president is that he's created this uncertainty in some ways for himself.
Yeah.
And I don't think the situation necessarily gets any better.
Well, this also adds to the many challenges facing Leader Thune, who himself is doing a very difficult dance with both Republicans in the Senate and the president. I want you to take a listen to what the president recently said. He was asked about his relationship with Leader Thune on Monday. Watch.
It's fine. It's fine. He's got to get his job done. It's fine. I have a good relationship with John Thune. He's just got to get his job done. You got to get the Save America Act passed. Or better than that would be the filibuster. If you terminate the filibuster, everything happens.
Okay, take a look at this reporting from the Wall Street Journal. The headline says, the Save America Act, the filibuster, and Thune's huge dilemma. Quote, Thune is in a boiling pot and the temperature keeps rising. Break Senate rules to help Trump. The Save America Act might still not pass. Or buck the president and deal with the political fallout. Lonnie, how tough of a position is Leader Thune in right now?
One of the worst jobs in Washington, maybe the worst job in Washington, because he does have to navigate between the dynamics of his conference, what Republicans in the Senate want and don't want, maintaining a good relationship with the president, which is important for a lot of different reasons, but where Thune has been publicly, which is an institutionalist. He is someone who has been very respectful of, for example, the filibuster. He's someone who's tried to say, listen, here's the math around Save America. Here's why it's going to have a difficult time. And for that, he's been rewarded with some vitriol from the right. And frankly, I think the skepticism of the president. So he's got a very, very difficult task. And I don't think anybody envies him. But I think he's doing the best he can, given the situation he's been given and the cards he's been dealt.
Joel, how are Democrats navigating all of this? Are there opportunities they're seeing, especially with some of the frustrated Republican members of both the Senate and in the House, too?
I think Democrats have a very clear-eyed analysis of what's going on here. Listen, when we talk about Todd Blanche, Tom Tillis, John Cornyn, Bill Cassidy, any other kind of bubble Republicans, wherever you may count it, these are folks who all want to support Todd Blanche. Like, it's pretty clear they want to get to yes. They want a little bit of cover to do that. They want to be seen as being fighters and being tough and holding Donald Trump accountable in the process. And they don't mind stirring up a hornet's nest right now because they have nothing politically to lose. And that's all of Donald Trump's making. Donald Trump is the person who made Tom Tillis, John Cornyn, Bill Cassidy less likely to politically want to play ball with him. I mean, that's the story of this era of politics, and particularly of the president's relationship to the Republican Party. All of the challenges that he's facing, he has created. These aren't exogenous events that have happened to Donald Trump. I mean, he made decisions. He could have allowed Ken Paxton to win that race without that endorsement of Ken Paxton at the last minute. So when you think about like how Democrats are thinking about it, I think the best thing Democrats can do, and trust me, and I know we're going to talk about it, we've got our own handful.
Don't you worry, we'll get there.
House, but I think Democrats have an understanding that this is a party, the Republican Party, that are having these fights right now, and that Donald Trump is going to continue to create these opportunities. And I think what Democrats need to do is to continue to apply pressure, continue to stay united, and continue to offer an alternative to the American people.
So my colleague Jordan Carney at Politico did some great reporting this week. She had to sit down with Thune, and she also wrote this. Senate GOP, an internal messaging reviewed by Politico, giving members guidance on how to navigate party infighting, save filibuster. Media will try to divide Republicans by asking your boss to pick a side in any given question. It's crucial to reject those false choices. Reject the false choice between the president and Senate leaders. Express support for both. As strategists, what do you make of that advice?
It's the best you can do. It's right, because but the, a lot of senators are probably caught in between those dynamics, but also the election year dynamics, and particularly because we do have a fight on our hands as Republicans for control of the Senate. It is going to be a very real question. Going to be a number of competitive races where some of these answers to some of these questions are going to have an impact on the electoral outcome, on how people view these senators. And so it's the best advice one can give, but it's going to be very challenging to maintain that position all the way to November, I think.
Yeah, ask a strategist. We're always happy to give you some free advice. What I would add, too, is that, Republicans in this era of Trump, I think there is going to be like a break point where, Trump in recent polls has shown to be almost at 30% approval. That is famously where a lot of people say that's the point where George Bush was in his second term, where you had Republicans that decided it was safe to break from George Bush. Where is the number where Republicans now in this era are going to decide it's safe to break from Donald Trump? I think the reality that's going to face them probably on the other side of the 2026 election is that Donald Trump will not be on the ballot again. Donald Trump will no longer be the source of power within the Republican Party. And what's next? And I know that feels distant from a lot of folks right now, but political gravity is political gravity. And I think Republicans are starting to wrestle with that.
Well, one other storyline that's playing out in the Senate is what's going on with Mitch McConnell. This week, the Kentucky Republicans' office said he's still not medically clear to return to work, and that prompted Kentucky Democratic Governor Andy Beshear to call on McConnell to prove that he can still serve. Listen.
Well, I hope in all this, right, because I don't wish him ill. I've known members of his family. We have always been polite to each other. I hope he can just provide, whether it's video or other proof, and we can move on, and all this speculation can end, and we ultimately know when he'll be back voting in the Senate. But we're all expected to be in a position to do our job, and it's not asking a lot for proof of it.
Joel, what do you and Democratic lawmakers make of Beshear coming out and saying this? Do you think that was a good move? Do you think that Democratic lawmakers might want a level of discretion if they were in McConnell's shoes, or what do you make?
I think in essence, he has a fiduciary responsibility to the people of Kentucky to fight for them to have a voice at the federal level. I mean, essentially for the last 2 months, they've been without full federal representation. That is not an unrealistic and unreasonable ask for the governor of a state to say, hey, we want our federal delegation to be fully represented. I think politically, to the point that you're making about how Democrats are thinking about Steve Beshear, sure. Other Democratic governors have had opportunities to kind of push back on Republicans and kind of Republican abuses in this era. Look at Gavin Newsom in California. Gretchen Whitmer took a different path in Michigan. Josh Shapiro has kind of taken a middle path, and now Beshear has his moment. So I do think there are these interesting, kind of profiles and courage moments that these Democratic governors are being presented with, and I think this is a moment for Beshear. But Dasha, look, and I'm a Senate kid. I grew up in the Senate. I worked for Harry Reid, Frank Lautenberg, Debbie Stabenow. I worked for elder members of the Senate. And I do think that beyond the politics of this, there is something around why do people feel like they have to hold on to power? Party agnostic. You could say the same thing about Dianne Feinstein in California a few years ago. You could say the same thing about the gentleman from Mississippi who's named Thad Cochran, who's escaping me right now, who also had health issues down the stretch of his career. Why are these folks feeling like their personal stake in the elected office is more significant than who they're representing? And I do think that the constituents that they represent are starting to confront those issues more directly now.
Lonnie, in practice, for Republicans, is it better to get Mitch McConnell back or better to not have him there for some of these votes?
Well, I think they'll need him for some of these votes. And I think for Republicans, there are just the question of the raw numbers, right? Are there going to be certain situations where his presence is going to be essential to ensuring an outcome? The Blanche confirmation may actually be one of those
Although
moments.
he hasn't exactly been like on the same page as the president for everything.
But he has voted with the president, like 95% of the time. So I think that he probably, there is a point at which, look, they do need his vote. On the Bashir thing, I just view it as pure political expediency. He decided he needed a moment to wedge his way into the 2028 presidential contest. He decided this was going to be his moment. Whether it's successful or not, we'll see. But the reality is, Bashir's got an axe to grind, right? Bashir's dad was first defeated by Mitch McConnell. The families have been polite to one another. That was very funny. I think that, it's sufficient to say that there's been a lot of political back and forth between the Bashir family and Senator McConnell over the years. So I view this as an act of political desperation in some ways by Andy Bashir. It is a fair point. I think senators do in many cases, and not just senators, but all politicians probably want to hang on a little longer than they should. But at the end of the day, this is not the first example, and it won't be the last.
All right, let's dig into some election politics, shall we, gentlemen? Joel, we're going to have some fun here. Because I really do want your take on what's going on with the DNC in particular right now. There's some reporting from Notice that got a lot of attention this week, saying that the Democratic National Committee put its physical headquarters up for collateral last year in order to obtain a $15 million line of credit to help invest in off-year elections, according to DC deed records not previously reported. Joel, this building has been used as collateral before, but is this concerning?
Gosh, are you suggesting that Democrats should be concerned about being $2 million in debt in the midst of the most important midterms of our lifetime? Yes, you should be.
Okay, there you have it.
Here's what I would just say. To be a successful party chair, and this is, again, party agnostic, I think you need to be able to get the resources in to help the party. You need to raise money. You need to build infrastructure. You need to have political judgment. You need to be able to be visible. Ken Martin, who by all accounts, a lot of folks who you talk to think this is a really well-intentioned, good man, tends to be a good public servant, just has not hit those mile markers in his year-plus tenure as DNC chair. And if you can't do those things, it is very hard for you to make a case to hold the confidence of the Democratic
Yeah, let me read this to you because Notice also goes on to talk about DNC Chair Ken Martin, saying a Democrat close to the DNC said Ken Martin, the beleaguered Democratic Party chair, has struggled to convince donors to maximize their contributions, which has contributed to the small cash on hand total. You think that's an accurate assessment?
Yes, and let's just go back to the person he defeated, Ben Wickler, who the entire case for Ben Wickler, kind of just going back to who he actually who was the option B that Democrats chose Martin over. This was someone who was highly visible, who has a skill set of going on television, who has a skill set of building infrastructure in an important state like Wisconsin. And I do think that a lot of Democrats are frankly regretting that decision because it seems like the moment is a little bit too big for Ken Martin. Seems like the moment in
station. This is Firebug. Firebug. Break. Tango. Mike. 3. Foxtrot. Tango. Mike. Zulu. 3. Foxtrot. Stand by. Tango. Mike. Zulu. 3. Foxtrot. 2. Stand by. Follow. Zulu. 3. Foxtrot. 2. Juliet. Bravo. Bravo. Lima. Hotel. Alpha. Zulu. Uniform. Echo. Victor. Mike. Delta. Lima. X-ray. Kilo. Tango. Bravo. X-ray. I say it again. Mike. 3. Foxtrot. 2. Juliet. Bravo. Bravo. Lima. Hotel. Alpha. Zulu. Uniform. Echo. Victor. Mike. Delta. Fox. Echo. 6. Lima. X-ray. Kilo. 6. Quebec. Tango. 6. Bravo. X-ray. This is Firebug. Out.
All stations, all stations. This is Firebug, Firebug, break. Tango, Mike, Zulu, 3, Foxtrot, 2, standby. Tango, Mike, Zulu, 3, Foxtrot, 2, standby. Tango, Mike, Zulu, 3, Foxtrot, 2, standby. Message follows. Tango, Mike, Zulu, 3, Foxtrot, 2, Juliet, Bravo, Bravo, Lima, Hotel, Alpha, Zulu, Uniform, Echo, Victor, Mike, Delta, Papa, Echo, 6, Lima, X-ray, Kilo, 6, Quebec, Tango, 6, Bravo, X-ray. I say again. Tango, Mike, Zulu, 3, Foxtrot, 2, Juliet, Bravo, Bravo, Lima, Hotel, Alpha, Zulu, Uniform, Echo, Victor, Mike, Delta, Papa, Echo, 6, Lima, X-ray, Kilo, 6, Quebec, Tango, 6, Bravo, X-ray. This is Firebug out. stations. This is Firebug. Firebug. Break. 4 a door. 4 a door. Golf. Papa. Kilo. Papa. Zulu. Kilo. Standby. Golf. Papa. Kilo. Papa. Zulu. Kilo. Standby. Golf. Papa. Kilo. Papa. Zulu. Kilo. Standby. Message follows. Golf. Papa. Kilo. Papa. Zulu. Kilo. Hotel. 7. Romeo. Oscar. 3. 2. Mike. 3. Papa. Alpha. November. Golf. Golf. Bravo. 7. Alpha. 5. Golf. Yankee. Foxtrot. 3. India. Victor. Oscar. I say again. Door a door. 4 a door. Golf. Papa. Kilo. Papa. Zulu. Kilo. Hotel. 7. Romeo. Oscar. 3. 2. Mike. 3. Papa. Alpha. November. Golf. Golf. Bravo. 7. Alpha. 5. Golf. Yankee. Foxtrot. 3. India. Victor. Oscar. This is Firebug out.
Firebug, break, Tango, Mike, Blue, 3, Foxtrot, 2, standby, Tango, Mike, Blue, 3, Foxtrot, 2, standby, Tango, Mike, Zulu, 3, Foxtrot, 2, standby, message follows. Tango, Mike, Blue, 3, Foxtrot, 2, Juliet, Bravo, Bravo, Lima, Hotel, Alpha, Zulu, Uniform, Echo, Victor, Mike, Papa, Echo, 6, Lima, X-ray, Kilo, 6, Quebec, Tango, This is Mansell with text count. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is Mansell with test count. Out.
Lima, stand by. Message follows. Golf, Papa, November, Mike, Hotel, Lima, Victor, Sierra, India, Whiskey, Bravo, Golf, Papa, Foxtrot, 7, 2, Uniform, Whiskey, Zulu, Papa, 2, 2, 4, 5, Charlie, Sierra, Golf, Yankee, 5, Papa. I say again, 4, a door, Golf, Papa, November, Mike, Hotel, Lima, Victor, Sierra, India, Whiskey, Bravo, Golf, Papa, Foxtrot, 7, 2, Uniform, Whiskey, Zulu, Papa, 2, 2, 4, 5, Charlie, Sierra, Golf, Yankee, 5, Papa. This is Firebug out.